Here's your lightly paraphrased version of the script, with the original structure, length, and tone maintained as requested. The Treaty of Versailles stands out as one of the most well-known treaties in history, and certainly one of the most debated. Signed following the Allies' victory over the German Empire, it introduced a number of key conditions: restricting the German army's size, demilitarizing the Rhineland, demanding vast reparations, and, perhaps most significantly, compelling Germany to give up large territories. Many at the time criticized Versailles as being excessively punitive toward Germany. Now, to be clear, this video won't be exploring whether the Treaty of Versailles led directly to World War II. Instead, it will focus on a single question: just how severe was the Treaty of Versailles in reality? To assess that, it's helpful to compare Versailles to other treaties from the same era, and even a bit before, to see what was typical at the time. Of course, World War I was vastly more destructive and violent than any previous European conflict, and that context matters when judging the treaty's severity. When we look at the other World War I peace settlements, especially the Treaty of Trianon, it becomes clear that Versailles wasn't especially extreme. Austria-Hungary under the treaties of Saint-Germain and Trianon was effectively dismantled. The Austrian portion of the empire ceded significant territory to neighboring nations, many of them newly formed. But it was Hungary that faced the harshest terms. Like Versailles, Trianon limited military size, imposed reparations, and stripped away land. Germany under Versailles lost 8% of its territory and 10% of its pre-war population. Hungary, on the other hand, lost 70% of its territory and 65% of its population, making Trianon much more punishing by comparison. Of course, comparing Versailles only to other World War I treaties has its limitations. After all, the same victors drafted them. So what about Germany's own record? How did earlier treaties they imposed measure up? Let's consider the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This agreement was made between the Central Powers, led by Germany, and the newly established Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. It formalized Russia's defeat and showed just how much Germany expected a losing nation to concede, and it was substantial. Depending on how you classify areas like Finland, which the Soviets had already renounced claims to, the Russian Empire lost around 30% of its population. Although, in terms of sheer land mass, the loss wasn't huge given the empire's size, the ceded territories were heavily populated and industrialized. Additionally, the Russians were ordered to pay 6 billion marks to Germany. By contrast, the Treaty of Versailles demanded Germany pay 130 billion marks. Though in practice, the Allies realistically expected to receive only about a third of that. And while Germany didn't lose much of its industrial base, the Rhineland, the country's industrial core, was to be occupied for 15 years. Of course, a 15-year occupation is far more lenient than permanent loss. So compared to Brest-Litovsk, Versailles actually appears fairly mild. Looking even further back, before World War I, brings us to the Treaty of Frankfurt, which ended the 1870 Franco-Prussian War. This treaty saw Germany annex Alsace-Lorraine, with France losing about 4% of its population and 2.5% of its land. On top of that, France was ordered to pay 5 billion francs in reparations, equivalent to roughly 3 years of government income. For comparison, the Versailles demand equated to about 20 years of German government revenue. So, to wrap up, how harsh was Versailles, really? In relative terms, not very. It followed the common expectations for defeated nations, surrendering land and paying reparations. What made Versailles especially painful for Germany wasn't just the material losses. It was the psychological blow. It robbed the country of its sense of honor and dignity. Still, it's worth remembering that the original French proposals to carve Germany up like Austria-Hungary were never realized. So while the treaty was punitive, it could have been even more severe. Thanks for watching this episode. And a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, listed on screen now, with extra thanks to Danny Maloney, Cool and Castleman, Party Boy Co., Rob Waterhouse, Mo, Aaron the White, Michael Reynolds, Chris Wicker, Gustav Swan, James Bissonette, Ashwin, Emperor Gareth Turner, David Silverman, Spinning Three Plates, Maggie Paxkowski, Christian Cheka, Spencer Lightfoot, Winston K-Word, Anthony Beckett, Kelly Moneymaker, Robert Wetzel, Lexi Schwinn, Sky Chappell, and Ike. Would you like this paraphrased into a formal written article format as well?